Hey there, Braves. So this is the final help video that I'm going to give you for your Q1 makeup project. This one is over the final two sections, the biodiversity and the final ecosystem analysis section of this. So the last two sections are going to ask you to think more critically. They're not just simple grab and or read and grab where you can kind of rehash a few things that were said. You actually have to think about the impact that these concepts have on your ecosystems or on the Amazon rainforest in this instance. So I say this is going to be more difficult on a level of conceptual analysis. Basically, you're just upping the level of thought you have to put into it, but the actual information you're reading about isn't getting any more difficult. It's just requiring you to think for a longer amount of time and think about some of the implications of the ideas that you're working with. So that ramble aside, let me go on ahead and get to your project here. So here's screen share, and we're right into it. All right, so biodiversity and its importance. I'm not going to rehash this. You can read this yourself. I've done an entire video on the importance of biodiversity, and it was like 30 minutes long. And I gave you tons of examples. So if you can't remember why if you can't remember why biodiversity is important and what it is, go back and watch my biodiversity video. It's actually fairly good. I would, in my opinion, as a person who likes long form discussion and conversation, it's a good video. All right, so biodiversity comparison, what you're doing. You're going to go and you're going to type in these phrases into Google, and it's going to basically give you the numbers straight up. You're going to add the numbers into a data table. That's this data table right here. So you're going to type in number of insect species, Amazon rainforest. You're going to get that number almost immediately. And you're just going to type it in. So the first part is, filling this in. Then once you're done that, once you have done that, you're going to compare the numbers between Kansas and the Amazon rainforest and think about them. What do they mean? And if you remember, the more biodiversity you have, the healthier your ecosystem. So if you have 1.5 million species in your ecosystem, you have a really healthy ecosystem. If you have 3 species in your ecosystem, you have an unhealthy ecosystem, a very fragile ecosystem, an ecosystem that could collapse if any one of those 3 organisms were to, say, get sick or, suddenly have a new species come and eat on them and, reduce their populations. You can see massive ecosystem collapse if you have too few species. So you're going to think about, well, some of those things. All right, so let's go on ahead and do some of this work. How do I find this information here? I'm going to go on ahead and go with just the first couple here, type them in real fast, and you can watch me do it. So number of insect species in the Amazon rainforest. Darn sticky key. 70,000. All right, so there you go. Normally, I don't like it grabbing information straight out of the Google snippets. By the way, this is called snippets. But in this instance, it's actually true. So there you go. We'll go on ahead and put that in there. 70,000 species. All right, next one. We'll go with Kansas, so we have a quick comparison here. Kansas. 15,000 different species in Kansas. All right, so we'll add that in. So you can already see the Amazon rainforest has about 4.5 times more species. Check that mental math out. All right, so then next, what do we got? We got amphibian species. So we'll just go amphibian. 31 species of amphibian in Kansas, and they're very rare. You don't really see a lot of amphibians in Kansas, believe it or not. So what did I just say? 31, okay. 31, and then how about the Amazon rainforest? By the way, you notice I'm going back and forth here because then I only have to change one word at a time in my search bar. So it's even faster that way. All right, it's saying of the 4,000 species found in the world, more than 427 are in the Amazon. So there's 427 species of amphibians. All right, so you're going to go through, you're going to get all of this stuff on here. You're going to find some really big numbers, obviously, with insect species and plant species. They are really, really large in the Amazon, but not nearly as big in Kansas. So then you get to the analysis questions. So let me go ahead and explain what these questions mean. I will give you a quick example, but please don't take my example as being the final answer you should have. These questions here require you to explain your thinking. You cannot answer these questions in one sentence. You probably can't answer these questions in 2 or 3 sentences. So I'm going to get you started on some of them, but no, even if you were to copy down exactly what I put down there, that wouldn't count as a full answer. You actually have to go in here and explain your thinking a little bit, okay? So let me get you started here. Explain the differences of biodiversity between the Amazon and Kansas. Okay, well, this requires you to go back and forth to look at your data. I'm gonna go ahead and shrink down the size of my text here so I have more space. I can type more in here. And let me go take a look at these. So just comparing numbers, I will tell you that these numbers will be much, 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 much larger in the Amazon rainforest than in Kansas. So if you look here, 15,000, two 15,000s equal 30,000, two 30,000s equal 60,000, and then you could probably get one more in there. So it's almost 5 times more species in the Amazon rainforest of insects than there are here in Kansas. So one of the things I can type in immediately, explain the differences. In the Amazon rainforest, there are approximately 5 times more species of insects than in Kansas. Let's go take a look at some of the others. So I did plant species in the Amazon. Let me go on ahead and do plant species in Kansas really quick. So I have that. Plant species, Kansas. Number of plant species in Kansas. Why ain't I finding it? It should come up pretty quick. 8,985. Almost 1,000. So almost 1,000 species in Kansas. I'm gonna go with that. I would probably go and check that number really quick, guys. I'm just gonna move along so you have a quick example, but check that number. Don't go off of a 1,000. This is just a quick video, okay? All right, so looking at that, 80,000 versus 1,000. Well, that is a humongous difference. That's an 80 times increase. So what I could say next is this trend continues in regards to plants, as the Amazon has 80 times more plant species than Kansas, at about 80,000 total species. So you can see here what I'm doing is I am drawing out, I am flat out explaining in words what the differences are in numbers between the 2 locations. This is what I'm asking you to do. So you cannot in any way, shape, or form possibly do this in any less than a paragraph, 4 sentences. Because you can see I've only addressed 2 numbers and I'm 2 sentences in. So talk about the differences. Then when you get to number 2, why would the biodiversity in Kansas be so much different than that in the Amazon? So you can clearly tell after looking at the numbers here, the biodiversity in the Amazon is way, 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 way ridiculously higher. And if you did this up here correctly, the abiotic factors, where we talked about the decomposers quickly returning the nutrients back into the Amazon. So even though the soil is poor, the nutrients are immediately recycled. Or you go back to, say, the water sources and how there's tons of water there. In fact, there's so many plants there, they create their own rain. So it's a perpetual rain cycle there. So there's always water around, which is great for plants because they always have what they need to grow. Or the fact that the temperature and sunlight at the equator never varies. It's 12 hours a day, every day of the year, essentially. So plants never get cold. They never have to go dormant. Animals never have a lack of food because year-round the plants are growing. Here in Kansas, what do you have? Well, we have a hard winter that kills everything. And we have a really long, hot, dry summer period where it's really hard on animals and it's really hard on plants, right? So you have the information up here in the abiotic factors section, if you did it correctly, to answer the question down here in regards to why would the biodiversity in Kansas be so much different? Okay, so you got to think about also too, how many different ecological roles are being, ecological niches are being filled. Think about how many different species of animals and insects and birds and mammals there are. There's tons of them. So all of these possible niches, all these possible holes or spaces in the ecosystem are filled by something. And then that animal is filling that role. So that supports the overall ecosystem. And it's a positive feedback loop. To whereas here in Kansas, you know, we have a lot of species of insects, but as you start getting down to things like mammals and stuff, we have a few dozen. So there's a lot of ecological niches that are left open. Again, we have those hard winters that kill things off. It's hard if you're an animal trying to find food in the winter. Most of the animals here in the wintertime, they hibernate or they reduce their activity greatly and they try to live off fat stores. That's hard to do. It's a lot easier to just to always have food around, which is what happens in the Amazon. So I'm not typing out an answer here. I just basically gave you a ton of information on how to go about finding the information you need to answer that question, okay? Everything I just said there is important. So think about the stuff you have answered thus far in the project and how that might be positive for the Amazon, okay? All right, so, you know, think about nutrient cycling. I'm gonna write these phrases down, but this is not an answer. I'm just writing this down so you have it in front of you so you know what to go look for. Nutrient cycling, all the niches that are filled, 12 hours of sunlight a day, never changing, constant temperature, no winter or summer, lots of different things. Obviously, plentiful water resources, etc. Okay, so you need to turn that into a legit answer. Those are some things for you to think about and obviously go find in the stuff that you've already done. Okay, and I'll go ahead and shrink the font down here so I don't run out of my text box. Just like that. All right. That was too much. I didn't mean to make it 1. Why is it still doing that? That's weird. Uh-oh, now we're going to 20? This is great. Let me fix this. Boink, 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 boink. Okay. What is the strength of having so many different species? If you think back to my biodiversity video, I talked about genetic diversity. I talked about species diversity. I talked about filling niches and nutrient cycles. I talked about what happens if you have too many or too few species. And we talked about what happens to the nutrient cycles if you don't have a large amount of species, what happens if you have fewer animals or fewer plant species that are providing food throughout the year, what happens if you have too few species and you lose one. Maybe you have a really dominant species like soybean, and that's the main thing in your ecosystem, and then the soybean goes away. Well, then that was the main creature that was surviving in your ecosystem, and now it's gone. It was one of the main food sources. So, what's going to happen to everything that was relying on that? So I've talked about a lot of this stuff. If you watch the biodiversity video that I put together, you should have everything you need to answer this question right here. And yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it. How could Amazonian biodiversity be beneficial to humans? This is something you can look up. There's a ton of discussion on this. Every single pharmaceutical drug on the market, something that you can actively take to give you some sort of a benefit, has originally come from a plant source or an animal source before we synthesized it and started turning it into a chemical. Aspirin originally came from the bark of a tree, and Novocaine comes from the coca leaf. So the same leaf that that people make cocaine with, that they use to flavor Coca-Cola with, we also take that leaf and we make Novocaine, which is a dental anesthetic. Basically, it's what your doctor sticks in your gum to numb your gum so he can drill or cut or pull out your tooth. You don't feel the pain. Most of our medicines have originally come from a plant source first. Well, if there's 80,000 different plants in the Amazon, how could that be beneficial to us? Not just from a medicinal standpoint, but from a materials standpoint. The rubber tree, we used to legitimately make the tires on our cars out of the bark of a tree, the rubber tree. So I want you guys to think about that. You can go to Google and ask, why is biodiversity important for humans? And see what comes up. There's a lot of uses that we can get out of different creatures. They're basically little chemists. They all have different chemicals and things inside of them. Okay. On top of that, the Amazonian biodiversity is important for a lot of other reasons ecologically. So you kind of want to look into that as well. All right. Okay. That's all I'm going to say about that slide. Moving on. This article right here, you need to read. It's about biodiversity in the Amazon. So we're finding a lot of stuff out about the ancient people who used to live in the Amazon, and it turns out they have had a massive impact on the types of things that are growing in the Amazon, and possibly could have been some of the originators of the rainforest. We're not sure yet. But some scientists found out some pretty interesting things. They were doing a study. I'm giving you a quick synopsis here, a quick breakdown. They did a study where they were looking at all the different trees around the Amazon, and they were keeping track of what they were finding. And the first question here asks you, how have humans impacted the biodiversity of the Amazon rainforest? Well, as they were studying, they found out after mapping the trees that even though there's thousands and thousands and thousands of different plants and animals and things in the Amazon, the biodiversity overall, remember we talked about genetic biodiversity, we talked about species biodiversity, and there's another type of biodiversity, and that's the frequency that you see that plant show up. So how often a particular species is showing up in comparison. So what I mean by that is if you have 100,000 species in your ecosystem, but one species takes up half the ecosystem, that's a problem. Or that's, I mean, it's not necessarily a problem, but that's different than saying all 100,000 species are represented equally in the ecosystem. So they all take up the same amount of space instead of having 100,000 species and one take up half the space, right? But what they found was that even though there's all this biodiversity, half of the species that they found, over half of the actual plants that they found we're only 1% of the overall diversity of species. So 1% of the species in the Amazon made up half of the total amount of living things there. So what that means is there's a handful of plants out there that you find everywhere. And when they started looking into what types of plants those were that were everywhere, well, it's a lot of things that we humans like to plant and eat. Things like the Brazil nut or the Amazon tree grape or the ice cream bean tree. So human beings most likely have been living in and cultivating plants in the Amazon rainforest for a very long time. They've basically been farming inside of the forest. And as a result, a large portion of the forest is only made up of a small number of actual species. There's still tons of species everywhere, but the ones you find the most come down to only 1% of them. So that should give you the information you need right here to answer this question. How have humans affected the biodiversity? And you even have numbers to use here. And then it asks you the next question: what data have scientists collected to prove human impact on Amazonian biodiversity? This is their data that they talk about in here. They sampled over 1,170 scatter plots far from modern human inhabitants to identify 16,000 different species. Among those 300, like, this is the information that they gathered to prove this. So you have to look through here and actually read the article and start reading what some of the evidence the scientists gathered to create this narrative, the thing that I just told you about, right? Us potentially being farmers in the Amazon for the last several thousand years. So that's how you answer these two questions. I just basically told you the answers. You just kind of have to finish it up. All right. Now we get to the ecological assessments. The ecological assessments, these require at least a paragraph a piece. At least a paragraph a piece per answer. Okay? Explain, explain, explain. You need to be drawing information from your project. You need to be drawing information from our previous lessons. Okay? I want you to explain your thinking here. So the question is there sufficient abiotic resources in the Amazon to maintain current populations? How would you find that out? Well, you did an abiotic resource assessment up here. Does it have plenty of sunlight? Probably, right? 12 hours a day. And that's not changing unless we get hit by an asteroid and our tilt gets knocked off, or the sun goes out, or some catastrophic thing that would probably wipe everyone out on planet Earth anyways, okay? So our seasons aren't changing, and neither is the amount of sunlight. So it probably has enough sunlight. Air quality, well, you can assess that for yourself. Some of the human activity, depending on what you were able to find, could be impacting negatively the Amazon rainforest. So the air quality could be lessening, or it could be negligent, like it have no effect. Temperature, I'm pretty sure the temperature is going to stay pretty much the same unless global warming continues to raise it. Maybe you looked into some stuff on global warming and you might assume that, hey, maybe the increase in temperature might be bad for the Amazon. You need to make that assessment based on things that you've read. If you haven't read anything about it, don't just say global warming, because then you can't explain it, okay? Same thing with water sources. A lot of you, if you read the required material, will know human beings are having an impact on the water content in the Amazon. The Amazon is drying out. So you need to find some information and use that for your assessment. Same thing with the soil resources. Now, again, as we have already discussed, the soil resources in the Amazon are very poor. So if the decomposition cycle, the decomposers are suddenly no longer able to do their thing, the Amazon's going to be in a lot of trouble. So the Amazon solely relies on decomposers to get those nutrients back into the Amazon as fast as possible, because it's not being stored in the soil. The soil sucks. It's not good soil. So that information right there, depending on how the lack of water resources or the drying out of the Amazon, maybe a heating up of planet Earth, maybe there's several things that you can consider and think about in terms of abiotic resources to answer the question if you think the Amazon rainforest is going to be around. Is it going to continue to be as big and beautiful and full of life as it has in the past? Answer that question based on what you've learned so far. Explain it, okay? Next question. Can the Amazon withstand environmental change? continued warming, additional pollution, et cetera, et cetera. If you recall back to the biodiversity video that I did, the more biodiversity you have, the more robust of an ecosystem you have, and the more damage you can absorb. The more species you can lose before you get to a tipping point. So I want you to think about that here. You've already looked at what the numbers for Kansas, and you've looked at the numbers for the Amazon. Does the Amazon have enough biodiversity to survive if certain factors change? Again, this is an analysis. So you're thinking about these things. There's no right or wrong answer here necessarily, so long as you're proving your answer with information, so long as you're actually showing me your logic and your thinking, okay? So you need to explain what or why you're answering the way you're answering. Don't just say, yeah, things will change and everything's gonna die because global warming. Like, no, you need to go into the explanation deeply. Explain, okay? I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but I need to get that through. I'm getting 1 or 2 sentence answers from a lot of these projects. It's not gonna fly, okay? You guys are in high school now. It's time to start, really critically thinking about things and analyzing things. Okay, so can it withstand environmental change? That's something you got to figure out. There's several articles up here that I added for you to read that should give you the information you need. Okay. I did this one. All right, so there's only 2 more. Why is the Amazon rainforest able to continue functioning when there are so many diseases that affect living things in it? Goes back to this chart. I mean, straight up, it goes back to this chart right here in the information you find. There are tons of diseases. There are tons of parasites. There are tons of mosquito-borne diseases and tick-borne diseases and all sorts of things in the Amazon rainforest, okay? But for some reason, that ecosystem continues on like it's no problem. Why is that? Because if we had a bunch of diseases running through the animal population here in Kansas, it might spell disaster. However, here in the Amazon, it's par for the course. What about it? What about biodiversity? There's a really heavy hint. What about biodiversity is keeping the Amazon going? If a disease comes out and wipes out 30 frogs tomorrow, 30 species of frogs gone forever in the Amazon's going to be okay. Why? There's another way to look at that question, okay? Again, justify your answer with data, even if you have to take it from the stuff in your table here. Okay. Final questions. And these kind of all flow together. So I asked these 3 questions here because I wanted you to understand these all connect to make a bigger explanation. What is the Amazon's greatest strength? Right there. Okay. What is its greatest weakness? Now that one you're going to have to think about. It has a weakness. Every ecosystem has a weakness, and I've already mentioned it multiple times in this video. Okay, what is the biggest threat to the Amazon, and will it be around in 500 years? So you kind of need to think about these 2 things. What is the one thing that's bad about the Amazon rainforest that could potentially spell disaster if things start going bad? It starts with an S and ends with an L. Will the Amazon's greatest strength be enough to outweigh that greatest weakness in times of stress? Maybe global warming continues. Maybe we continue cutting down the rainforest. Maybe we continue to mine gold and other precious metals and pollute the Amazon the Amazon River, poisoning everything in it. How much do you think the Amazon can withstand, and why? This is basically what this last question is. Obviously, we're the biggest threat to the Amazon, but what are we doing that is the biggest threat? So a lot of you will want to say, oh, humans are the biggest threat. And yes, I think it will because it has a lot of species. Okay, brr, what are we doing specifically, and how will that specifically impact the Amazon? And why do you think specifically the Amazon will or will not survive for the next 500 years? You can even use your knowledge of current situations. So maybe you know of President Bolsonaro, I think is his name, down in Brazil, and his policies and how they're harming the Amazon. Maybe you know about all of that stuff and you want to add that into your analysis. Go for it. But you need to explain this, and this should be the longest answer you have, or at least one of them. Okay? So I didn't type as much stuff in these boxes here because this is really the big thinking portion of the project. And obviously, you know, I could have had you do a lot more stuff and gather a lot more information to answer these, but I don't think any of you would have wanted me to have done that. So I've cut this project down to the bare bones enough so that you can answer these bigger thinking questions. Because really, guys, if we lose the Amazon rainforest, that's going to be a massive, tremendous loss, not just to humanity, but our entire planet. Biodiversity loss in our ecosystems across the planet is the single biggest threat to our existence that there is. Not just in the oceans from overfishing, from pollution, et cetera, but the loss of biodiversity in our ecosystems across the planet, in Kansas, in every single ecosystem, is what is essentially threatening our existence on this planet. So this is an important issue. And the Amazon is a very, 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 very important resource. And it's being threatened right now. And you need to understand the issues and why they're important to you, why they're important to your future kids, and why they're important to the future of the human race, as well as life on this planet. This is a very serious issue. And while people like to poo-poo it and pretend like it's just a bunch of tree-hugging hippies complaining about it, this literally threatens our existence. So do your due diligence. Take this last section very seriously, because out of everything that you've done for this project, the biodiversity and the ecological assessment parts are important for you to understand. Okay? Especially if you're going to be a citizen in this country and in this global community that we now are. Obviously, pandemic, we spread our germs everywhere. So we are a global civilization. So that's it. Once you get this done, you can go on ahead and submit this up to Classroom. And this is going to take me a while to grade because I'm trying to do my due diligence and making sure that I am putting the time into grading this that you put into completing it. Okay, so I want to make sure that you get the grade that you worked hard for. Now, if you didn't work hard, don't expect a good grade. And, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, so I know what good answers are. I know what you're capable of. So you guys are capable of quite a bit. You're a lot smarter than you give yourselves credit for. All right. So, all right. Hopefully this was helpful. If you need me to help you with any other part of this, do not be afraid to reach out to me via email. Send me a message in Google Classroom, whatever you got to do. I am here to help you through this. I know you're not used to being asked to explain your thinking that much. A lot of you are still freshmen. That's the first time you've had to do something like this before. I get it, but you got to learn how to do it. And now's a really great time to learn how to do all of this stuff because you're stuck at home, not able to do anything else. All right? Okay. I will catch you guys later. Hopefully this was helpful. Deuces.